So here's how we expect the afternoon to set up here. Normally at this point in a normal inauguration in which Washington, D.C. wasn't gripped with single-digit wind chills, they would wrap up here at the Capitol and then have a procession down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. And the streets would be lined with crowds. And at some point, the new president would get out and walk a little bit, and it would be a huge spectacle in Washington. But due to the weather, the procession parade has been moved indoors. We're not sure what that's going to look like, but all day today, fans of Donald Trump and his policies have been gathering inside the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C. They've heard from Elon Musk. They've heard from Kash Patel, who Donald Trump would like to lead the FBI, and other members of Team Trump. And we understand that some of the groups that were going to participate in the parade are actually going to parade through
into the arena,
Capital One Arena.
Through the arena. And you talk about all the people that have been gathering throughout the day at Capital One Arena. About 20,000 people are there to hear the president speak. Of course, J.D. Vance as well. They've heard from a host of speakers throughout the day, from Sarah Huckabee Sanders to, as you mentioned, Kash Patel. We're told that they will hear from Tom Homan. I don't know if that happened or not yet, but it is a long day, which is followed the afternoon rally by, of course, the inaugural balls, which are such a big part of today's celebration. So this is just at the halfway point here of their day for President Trump. It is now about 2 o'clock, or it is 2 o'clock at the nation's capital right now. We are joined
Actually, I think it's 4 o'clock there.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Yes.
You're right. We're on Central, they're on Eastern. Yeah.
By the way,
4 o'clock.
do you remember in his last term, the president, after being in France and seeing the Bastille Day military parade, some other places, that's what he wanted back then, to have that kind of grand parade. But he was told at that time by his generals, who were more likely to stand up to him than they would this time around, but they basically said the streets of Washington can't handle that. That'll tear up the streets.
Sean Morrison, I wonder who you want to fill out a Trump administration. We've seen some of the confirmation hearings begin, haven't gotten to all of them yet, but do you want a true loyalist who doesn't say no to Donald Trump, or do you want somebody who challenges the commander-in-chief?
It's a great point. I mean, obviously, I'll start with this premise. Every president has the right to pick their cabinet. They have the right to surround themselves with folks that they feel that they can trust, and that there's loyalty to the confidentiality nature of it. Not to get lost with blind sycophants or anything along those lines. If I can wave my magic pen here, I would want someone, men and women that are going to serve for the best interest of those executive offices that they're overseeing. Sometimes when we talk about, what are qualifications or things of that nature, the Attorney General is not going to prosecute a case. The Secretary of Defense is not necessarily going to be the person that's going to lead a charge on a battlefield. But for the most part, they're going to take the directive that the president, whomever they are, in this case now it's Trump, sees that he wants the direction of his military or his Department of Justice to go, or whatever, and they're going to carry out the executive side of it, the executive form of that government office, to make sure that the men and women that are competent attorneys and prosecutors, or competent generals, or competent folks of education and transportation or energy, so on and so on. And they're going to hopefully put them in place and make sure that everybody's on the same board. I think to a large part, Trump did not have that in his first term. I think, he came in blind. Let's be frank. He was not a politician. He came in and he brought people in that I think he had relationships with and felt that they would serve his interest. But I won't call them out, but I think there were plenty that went in and served their own interests as opposed to.
Let me just pick up on the Attorney General piece for a moment. You're right. He had Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, neither of whom survived the whole term. Sessions, of course, out quickly because he wouldn't do as Trump asked him. But are you concerned this time around, Pam Bondi, and you can't argue she doesn't have the credentials to be Attorney General. She certainly does. But at the same time, during her hearing, when she was asked whether she would not obey an order that would require or call for the Department of Justice to do something illegal or constitutional, wouldn't answer the the question. And it's 4 years old at this point. But when asked who won the presidential election of 2020, she wouldn't answer that. Basically, just said, well, Joe Biden is the president. My point is, the Department of Justice is to be an independent entity, even though it is housed within the executive branch. So as Ben asks you, does it give you any pause to have somebody who clearly is credentialed to do the job, but wouldn't take that extra step to say, if asked to do something illegal or unconstitutional, I would say no?
Again, I would go to the obvious situation. I mean, she's not been confirmed yet, and there's a side of politics that goes with it. Let's not lose sight of it. And that's that. We have several different things that are going on. So you have a president that's in there, Republican or Democrat, right? Over the years. B, they get to choose who it is that they want, and typically their politics is going to have a lot to do with that. Mm-hmm. Very seldom have you seen a Democrat put Republican folks into these spots. Very seldom have you seen a Republican do the opposite. So I think that it's an obvious choice. Why didn't she answer that question? I thought that was perhaps a lost opportunity as well. That could have purely been.
Pete Hegseth in defense, same thing. There's questions about his credentials there, but putting those aside, also when asked if you were asked to do a military action, like to shoot people in the leg, which was something that happened during the 2020 riots, he wouldn't answer the question directly. Now, I realize that their concern is they do have a loyalty, certainly, to the now president, because they were picked for this job, but there should, I would guess, also be an expected level of independence from these folks who are going to head up a particular branch.
I hear that, but I would also say, and I would acknowledge that, but I would also say that under these circumstances for hearings, it is certainly partisan in nature.
All righty, Sean, thank you. Let us listen in to a moment or two of President Donald Trump moments after he took the oath of office, becoming our nation's 47th president. Let's listen to a brief portion of his inaugural address.
We will be working to meet every crisis with dignity and power and strength. We will move with purpose and speed to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day.
And that was part of his address. Not everyone happy about the changing of the guard in the nation's capital, though.
Some protesters gathering in Chicago this afternoon. Sean Lewis live outside Trump Tower with more. Sean.
Trump Tower here today, one earlier this morning in which the group burned an American flag in protest, the other one happening at Federal Plaza at first and then made its way here to Trump Tower in the afternoon. That was a much larger protest, by the way, that began around 10:30 this morning. It involved about 80 groups who are no strangers to protesting President Trump. They were often at the center of those protests that we saw here in Chicago and around the country during the first Trump presidency. Those protesters say that they are fighting for minority groups, including immigrants, and vow to keep on with their protests in the years to come. There was another protest that was planned for today as well, a third one. That one was postponed, though, because of the sub-zero wind chills, and will be done later on in the week. All of these happening, by the way, outside of Trump Tower, where there was a watch party for the inauguration with Trump supporters inside. One of those supporters came out. We talked with them. We will have much more on all of these protests and what those Trump supporters had to say because of these protests coming up on the news starting at 4 o'clock. But for now, we'll send it back to you in the warm studio.
All right, get warm. Thank you. Sean Lewis reporting for us this afternoon. And again, we are joined today by two local Republicans with reaction to the inauguration of the president. You've got Greg Hart, who's a Republican and former DuPage County Board, and then as well as Sean Morrison is the chair of the Cook County Republican Party, and of course the one and only, our political analyst here at WGN. Who are you again?
I don't even know anymore.
Who has been here all day, Paul Lisnek. Sean touched on sort of these demonstrations, the protests. Let's talk about how things have changed for Donald Trump just in the last few years. We're not seeing what we saw, in 2017, right? How has he changed, and how has his opposition changed?
I think from an opposition standpoint, people are used to Donald Trump. I think when he first came in there, he's still the disruptor that he was 4 and 8 years ago, but they're used to the style. And I think, as we said in the earlier segment, that's really what has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, not necessarily the policies, but the style. In terms of how he's changed, I think one thing that we'll be seeing over the next definitely a few months and 4 years is that he knows the job better than he did before. He knows how to work the levers of power and get things done from within the Oval Office. And that's why I think you'll be seeing him take a lot more expedited action.
But by the way, if I can, Sean, yes, he knows the job better than he did the first time around. But isn't it also fair to say that the first time around, a lot of Americans thought this was a fluke? How did this happen? Everybody knows now who Donald Trump is and what to expect. So right now he steps into a world of a country who, in terms of the majority of people who voted for him. So that's a different part of the world too.
Yeah, certainly. When I think both sides of the aisle initially in 2016 did not think Donald Trump was going to become the president.
He didn't think he was going to become the president.
Some might say that. Some might, some have said that. And I think a lot of that indicates to our conversation earlier, Donald Trump came in and he really didn't know how to fill out a cabinet, by the way. So what did he do? He picked people that he kind of knew from his private business world, people that he may have talked with or had relationships with, and put those folks in. We're going to find out 2 years from now, 4 years from now, how successful Donald Trump's next term is going to be. I believe, though, that this midterm loss, this 4 years that have gone by, for me as a Republican standpoint, I see some hope that may have come from that, because had Donald Trump just won again, he'd actually be ending now. And who knows what this last 4 years would have been. 4 more years of obstruction and those types of things from opponents on the left. The nation got to see what 4 years would look like under a different president, under Biden, who they had known for 45 years before that, and they got to see what's kind of going on. Now, look, there's some wisdom to saying that Biden came from he was a VP for 8 years, so he had qualifications there, but there's been a lot of really cruddy policies and effects that have taken place in this last 4 years. Both sides of the House see it. The major debate always comes to Election Day. You can debate both sides of that, and it's usually at Election Day that determines what the majority of people think. And this time they spoke. He won a majority of the Electoral College, and he won majority to vote. Donald Trump, I think, is going to be far better suited here to come again. What do I fear, and I hope that it doesn't occur? I hope that we don't see, and unfortunately, I've been alarmed in the last few weeks by the language that the Democrats themselves have put out, politically speaking, of doing nothing now but obstruction. I mean, they're having calls for organized obstruction.
Well, they have no power to do much as a party right now in Congress.
Well, I mean, to your point, so they had a lot of power when Clinton lost to him, and they were in place, and I think they were far better organized at that point because you had the Clinton apparatus in place. Another shortfall, politically speaking, is that from day one, Biden did not have much of an apparatus in place, which could also, indicate why this election went the way it went. But I don't know that we're going to see that. Jeffries, Schumer, Pelosi, they've been trying to gin up their side for the last 60 days or so. You see all these issues. I think they're going to try to find whatever they feel is going to resonate to re-engage the Democrat strongholds, and they'll probably come out at it. I hope that they take the opportunity, though, to let's try something a little bit new in politics, and let's try and work together and just let's just address the bigger issues that will be beneficial for all of America.
To your point, it's clear, and I think Democrats, we've heard everyone from Rahm Emanuel to Hakeem Jeffries and others say this, just being outraged by every utterance of Donald Trump doesn't work. Because, to your point, you called him a showman earlier, he benefits from that. So I guess, what do you think would be, as somebody who has had to straddle the line politically, you're a Republican in DuPage County, which has turned increasingly blue. What do you think it looks like to actually get us to a point where we're debating policy over personality, Greg?
Well, look, when policy and personality clash, personality usually wins, unfortunately, right? So I think ultimately, the sooner we get to the midterms, the more difficult that's going to be. But look, I think there's issues where Republicans and Democrats and the Trump administration can work together. There's been a lot of discussion about the tech bros that attended the inauguration, a lot of discussion about TikTok in the last 24 hours even. And yes, you've seen Donald Trump reverse his position on that particular app. But that's one issue where there's bipartisan support from a national security standpoint. And I think it provides the president and both sides of the Congress to work together and maybe put the country first. So a lot more remains to be seen.
All right, let's listen in a little bit to the celebration that's happening today with the inauguration. They're at the rotunda right now, right?
This is some of the pomp and circumstance of the day.
And this is the first honors ceremony. Again, they just released everyone from the inaugural luncheon, and you saw a host of people there from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and his wife to, of course, all of Donald Trump's family, J.D. Vance and his family, a number of lawmakers, and they've all now moved over to this area of the Capitol to watch this first service.
This is all happening in the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center, seeing that first military man who was just in the foreground. And these gentlemen here reminds me that these are members of the Space Force, if you would, which was something that 4 years ago, 8 years ago now, I guess, Donald Trump began to put an emphasis on. These are members of the military who are taking part in this ceremony in the Capitol Visitor Center, just as members of Congress begin to leave their luncheon. We understand that folks will then be making their way over to Capital One Arena for the indoor version of the parade from the Capitol to the White House. It's always fascinating to me as a nerd of U.S. history.
You said it.
Yes, well, you felt it. What is taking place right now inside the White House? This is the fastest moving ceremony you will ever experience, because they are getting all of the Biden stuff out. They are putting the Trump stuff in. If there's going to be new carpet in the Oval Office or new wallpaper on the walls, this is their window when they do that. I know they were doing a couple of modifications to the press briefing room, which of course is on top of the old, now covered over swimming pool inside the White House. But there's a lot going on in this town. And this is an opportunity for the biggest moving ceremony our nation knows.
They're given 5 hours to make that shift in total, literally almost to the minute. And it's not only, this is not just a matter of the Oval Office has the new pictures on the wall, which it will, but it literally is, and President Trump, your toothbrush is ready for you in the bathroom. And I believe the first thing they're told when they arrive from the chief of that staff is welcome home. So it's amazing how they get this done. They do it usually every 4 years or every 8 years.
Did you cover an inauguration, Ben? I feel like you have.
I have not. I've been to the White House a bunch for
Right.
reporting, but I have not covered an inaugural ceremony. Boy, I'm now been doing this long enough. I had to actually stop
behind,
and
yeah.
think about it.
But you used a toothbrush that was left there.
I will cop to stealing some M&Ms with the White House logo on it during a White House visit. Greg, are you going to admit on camera that you have done the same?
I have a few boxes saved, in fact. But
I took 3 forks just to, as long as we're all coming clean.
Here's a fun fact. My dad, the year I was born, started a match factory in Frankfurt in the southwest suburbs, like Matches, not Match.com, Matches Fire. And we used to make the matches for Air Force One.
Wow.
Until, of course, smoking bans came into effect, and then no doubt some reporter did a story about why does the White House have matches on Air Force One, and we lost that deal. But it was very cool, right? A reminder of just kind of some of the special mementos that exist in Washington, D.C. and at the White House.
I think it's important to mention, look, no matter what party you're with, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you see an inauguration like this in a moment like this at the nation's capital, and it's moving, right? Because you realize the significance and the history of our country. So it's a beautiful moment to see. And there you're looking at live pictures. And the celebration really continues throughout the afternoon. Now it is 4:15. The nation's capital. They're on Eastern time. We are on Central, so they're an hour ahead of us right now. Again, all of the folks will be heading over to the Capital One Arena, where the celebrations and the speakers will continue. And President Trump will, of course, address the 20,000 people who have gathered there today.
You do have to wonder, and we're not going to have an answer to this question, but Donald Trump and his family are in the incredibly unique situation where they did this for 4 years. They lived in the fishbowl. They lived with the Secret Service protection. And then they were out of it for 4 years. Yeah, they still had some Secret Service, but, you know, you could go to lunch without stopping traffic, et cetera. And I thought of Barron Trump, who we saw today, who I think is about 18 years old now, and how the Trump family members' lives are going to change again. And there has to be a part of them that says, oh boy, we're going back into it.
Except Melania has made it clear she plans to spend part of her time in D.C., but part of it at Mar-a-Lago, and part of it in New York, because Barron goes to school at NYU. So maybe her plan is to give Barron as normal an upbringing as she can, given that he's the son of the president.
And Paul, talk about his family's involvement this time around, right? Because Ivanka Trump is not going to the White House, where she was one of the senior advisors in the past. So it has shifted, it has changed a little bit as to their roles.
Well, it's in so many ways. It's interesting. If you remember from 8 years ago when President Trump came into office the first time, there was this whole, not a ceremony, but a moment where there were all these papers on a table, and it was his step to sign all of his personal interests off to make sure that they were in trust and not under his control. As time went on, it became clear that maybe didn't happen, but that apparently what he was doing. This time around, we're not hearing about any of that. In fact, I think you mentioned earlier, Ben, he issued a coin, a cryptocurrency just the other day. And, you know, this time around, people understand who President Trump is. This is what you get. So you don't hear any complaining about emoluments or making money where you shouldn't. It just comes with the territory with him. So it's very different. We don't know exactly the roles that Don Jr. or Eric, the sons, are going to play, although Don Jr. has been really active in cabinet selections, critical of the selection of J.D. Vance as the vice presidential. Now vice president.
Greg, does it bother you that we are not seeing some of the traditional, whether that's here's a copy of my tax return, to I am not going to be involved in business in any form or fashion, to selling merch days before the inauguration?
Look, it does to a point. I would hope that he would have followed norms that indicated, you know, where his money's being made, as other presidents have. But I think, you know, to others' point, the reason he's not facing that type of blowback is because people know what they're going to get. You know, one thing on that same note that does interest me a lot, you know, there's a lot of discussion about who was at this inauguration. The fact that Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, the TikTok CEO, they were sitting right behind the Trump family. Look, this isn't the first time in American history where, to use Joe Biden's word, oligarchs have had power and influence over a president. You know, a lot of the discussion today is focused around William McKinley. In Trump's first term, he was trying to draw parallels with Andrew Jackson. This time it seems to be William McKinley. William McKinley was very close with John D. Rockefeller. The only difference was that John D. Rockefeller didn't have an office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And so that's the part that I think the American people are going to have to wrestle with. Are we comfortable? No disrespect to Elon Musk. By the way, I think he's one of the greatest minds of our generation and obviously a world-class entrepreneur. And our tech industry has been the biggest proponent of American leadership around the world. So I do think our president should have relationships with these CEOs. But what level of power are we going to give them actually within the government? I think that remains to be seen.
Okay, let's stick with that because I think there's a lot of talk right now about the effects of social media on our young people, on our mental health, right? And so I wonder moving forward as legislation and policy gets drawn up to address social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatnot, what role do these tech executives play, and does it worry you and concern you about what that may look like?
It's a good question because we are one of the only industrialized country, if that's the term to use, that hasn't regulated these platforms in some way or another. Australia, a peer country, if you want to think of it that way, has some very restrictive laws when it comes to social media. And I think this is going to be an interesting question for the next Health and Human Services Secretary if he's confirmed RFK Jr. We talked a little bit about Pete Hegseth's confirmation, Pam Bondi's confirmation, Kash Patel's will likely be coming up. I do think what some of the more controversial picks, such as Kash Patel, is going to do is going to give some breathing room for maybe some picks that had been viewed as controversial, but in comparison might not be. And I think RFK has said something along the lines about social media's influence on young people. I think we're likely to see some action, but I am curious about that.
And you made a good point that whether you want to call them oligarchs or business tycoons or what have you, they have been in the room influencing our politicians for as long as America has been a country, right? Like, we talk about, oh my goodness, Elon Musk is sitting in vetting meetings. Well, that ignores that healthcare executives have helped write legislation related to the healthcare industry. Or, you could go down the list.
That's right. It's not a new thing. It's not a new thing. What this is doing is actually just bringing it to the forefront. Again, not saying it's a good or a bad thing. Again, I think they should have relationships. But for the outrage about Elon Musk's influence, they've always had influence. The bigger concern, in my view, is how directly are they going to impact policy? And again, if you're having an office in the West Wing in the White House, you're going to have a bigger say than someone sitting in Silicon Valley.
But also, Ben, at another level, it's one thing to say the pharmaceutical companies are involved in pharmaceutical legislation with the partisan nature that brings with it, of course. But when Elon Musk is involved in selecting who your cabinet of a member of whatever is going to be, we've seen Steve Bannon, who has no official position here, but calling Musk all sorts of horrible names because of the influence he's having and trying to push him out. So I think it's different than somebody with some kind of expertise, even though if it's partisan expertise in the healthcare industry, being involved there and somebody saying, "Let me help you pick who your cabinet members will be."
Why is it worse to have Elon Musk whispering in the ear of the president than it is to have Steve Bannon whispering in the ear of the president? Or
not making that judgment.
On the other side, David Axelrod, or you can pick whichever political whisperer that you want, but they've existed forever. The interesting thing, I think, when it comes to talking about tech bros, Greg, to use your term, there is how they then control the information pipeline
and that's
to the
what
American
I was getting at.
public, right? And all you have to do is look at your social media feed to know that's not the real world. And I have my kids all the time say, "Oh, I saw this thing on TikTok or I saw this thing on Instagram. Can you believe?" And you try to talk to them about, well, what's the source on that? Where did that come from? And it's a losing battle. Sean, I wonder, because your faction of the Republican Party for years and years and years has criticized bias in the media as you see it, or has criticized unfair reporting, do you have the same concerns on the other side when Elon Musk is throttling what tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people are seeing on Twitter?
Yeah, and Elon lately has kind of moved along now to Europe, right? So we're seeing some of that.
I don't know. I always laugh because I shouldn't say laugh, but I'm always struck. People talk about the mainstream media, and
Or what the
Fox, more people are watching Fox News Channel or 10 years ago, 15 years ago, listening to Rush Limbaugh, right? Like, there is not one dominant source of information and has not been for years.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, look, our nation is obviously, within 5 percentage points, just bears it out, where you have folks that might be deemed conservative and folks that might be deemed liberal, right? Mm-hmm. And you have multiple media sources that feed both of those, and that's the business side of it. And by the way, the news, and you guys know this probably better than I do, the news is wholly different in Memphis, Tennessee, than it is in Chicago, mm-hmm. than it is in Florida, mm-hmm. than it is in Texas. Mm-hmm. And even with the same stations, even with perhaps a Fox affiliate or a Fox, right? I don't know how you get around that, but the larger question is, should we be comfortable with a lot of these tech giants and the media ones? So in this case, Twitter, Facebook, Meta, TikTok.
Let's listen to the national anthem for just a moment, because there you see Donald Trump now as Commander-in-Chief saluting during the anthem. That ceremony taking place in the Visitors Complex inside the United States Capitol. This is where, if you visited the Capitol in the last few years, this is where you would enter and begin your tour. This is the ceremony that's taking place just before President Trump and his family will head to Capital One Arena for the indoor parade. And yes, more speeches.
Okay, and just before, you want to listen a little bit longer? All right. And there's President Trump and his wife, Melania, First Lady Melania Trump, being escorted out of the Capitol, or headed to Capital One Arena. And as before we went to this, we were having an interesting conversation about the involvement and the influence of the tech world and the CEOs and the billionaires. And so I'm wondering what shifted for Donald Trump during the 4 years of the Biden presidency, because he had a lot of adversaries, a lot of opposition during his time in office. And then all of a sudden something shifted. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily winning the election. I feel like it was starting to build even before that. Do you feel like it was the tech world and the social medias and the online platforms that really helped him elevate his persona and his style and the things that he wanted to do?
Yeah, I do. You know, you could not have scripted a better political series of events than the previous 12 months to November 6th. And some of them tragic and some of them harmful, but I think what happened is the Democrats got way ahead of their skis on strategy. The Justice Department going after Trump really woke up a lot of Americans throughout the country who just thought that we can agree to disagree, but thought that that was targeting, and they thought that that was unfair and necessary. I think that was kind of the start of it. Then a series of other events, right? You know, the assassination attempt, faux pas made by both Harris and Biden. But then you certainly have to talk about there was a change in climate. Let's use the terms that were used, of the woke versus the non-woke. And, the non-woke being subjected to woke for 4 years and being preached to and talked down to. Then you enter the business side of it and the tech side of it. There was a massive change in how they went about with even their DEI policy. See, all that's a big topic now. And I think that they started to see some fractures and they started to say, hey, wait a minute, this Trump guy may end up winning again. And business being business, private sector being private sector, I think they said, you know what, maybe we need to back off perhaps the level of support that we're showing to the Biden at that time still Biden and then Harris, and let's start to re-engage Trump. By the way, you know who else did it, shockingly? Labor.
Yeah.
Labor did. That's really not been talked about much, although you're going to see Sean
Fain
is there, I believe, tonight. But so there was that shift to that. Yeah. As it pertains to the media side, well, you got these tech guys, and let's face it, they own Facebook and they own Twitter and they own all these platforms. What compelled Musk to buy Twitter? And some would say, and I even agree, he probably overpaid for it when he $40 billion is a lot of dough. But what act within a quarter, within probably 60 days, really started a massive.
Yeah, because it was that quick.
Massive shift. They took the filters off. I mean, you could say filters existed, they didn't exist. They existed, and in fact, testimony, everybody, they said that they understood that they existed. There was a lot of reasons why they gave, that algorithms did that. But once that door was open up and people got to say whatever they want, if you listen to what a lot of these folks are saying, the tech pros are saying, is their vision for this, and I don't know it's going to be right or wrong, I agree with you, is to just let everybody say whatever it is they're going to say and let the people sort it out. I don't know if that it remains that way.
As journalists, the fear is, and we see this all the time, and that is, the old quote that, the truth gets halfway, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has its chance to get its pants on in the morning. You're absolutely right, though, Sean. It was a perfect storm with every break going in Donald Trump's favor. I remember being up in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention days after he was the victim of an assassination attempt, which nobody would wish upon him in a million years. But the energy in that arena when he appeared with a bandage on his ear, there was a seismic shift in our politics. And whether that created sympathy for Donald Trump, whether that caused people to finally tune in, I don't know. But it was indeed a seismic shift.
Here's what gives me a little solace on at least with the tech pros. And by the way, it's not just Musk with Twitter, it's not just Zuckerberg with Meta, but let's not forget Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post.
Yeah, well, he was there, front and center,
right behind him. The one thing I will say is while we all may be a little uncomfortable with the level of influence they may have, what is true about them is that they're businessmen and they're going to go with the cyclical nature of politics, right? They will, and their businesses will, outlast Donald Trump's presidency because this is going to last 4 years and those will last longer. So I'm less concerned with that in the long term. What I do think was a pivotal moment for Donald Trump and how he and his team have really changed the culture is that they reinforce a common political theme, and that's you can't convince people what they should care about. They know what they're going to care about. And, for all of the things that Donald Trump has said over the last 2 years, when he was on message, he was talking about people's lives, the economy, and inflation. And you can't say the same about Kamala Harris's campaign.
But the outrage machine that is cable news and social media plays such an outsized role in what we are saying is important in terms of gripping America, right? Let's take the trans issue, right? That you have, biological boys going through hormone replacement, competing as girls. You know how often that happens? Very, 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 very rarely. I think it was like less than 1% of America is trans. Even fewer, I think the IHSA, and we're doing actually a story on this in a couple weeks, the IHSA has given waivers fewer than 100 times in Illinois, and most of those are not actually competitive sports where, where
they're actually working with a team.
Exactly,
right,
where
of the
I'm
opposite
running
sex,
faster
right.
than the person next to me. And yet, boy, does that strike a nerve with people, right? They look at their own daughter maybe and say, oh, I want her to have the opportunity. And that is an issue that is driven, I think, a lot by social media and cable news.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't get a whole lot of coverage on the local news front. Do you feel like it does? I mean, it's rare.
So I have been researching for the last few weeks for this story we're doing. Okay, give me an example of, a trans person who competed in a high school sport in the Chicago area who took somebody else's trophy. You have lawsuits over access to bathrooms by trans people, but you don't have that issue, which is what you hear about on cable news and on social media, happening a lot.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that, Betty. And one thing, having run political campaigns, I'm sure Sean can agree, for better or for worse, it's the cultural issues that get most people out and vote to the polls. Yeah, people vote on their pocketbook, right? But especially when it comes to this primary-centric system we have, it's the culture issues, and that's why you see, the issues of trans women and trans sports.
Right.
And on the flip side, it's not only the right that plays that game. That's why you see Democratic politicians running on, social issues like
Calling people
Abortion.
fascists.
Exactly, right.
Abortion, yeah.
For races that can't impact that whatsoever. So,
And by the way, sorry, on the parallel track, Sean mentioned the legal suit, so a brief comment on that, which is the incredible success that the Trump team had in delaying every one of those suits, literally for years, coupled with, I'll say, Merrick Garland's incompetence in waiting as long as he did to do anything about it, probably because he was trying to avoid looking political and not quite understanding that whenever he acted and whatever he did was going to look political. But add all of that up, and even that very strong leg of this process, which was the legal process, as you said, Sean, you had so many people believing this was, the witch hunt and a setup and a weaponized Department of Justice. None of those trials happened. And then, by the way, finally getting the luck of the draw of one of 4 judges in Florida. Aileen Cannon was just one of 4. Trump couldn't have gotten any luckier than somebody who literally ruled and got overturned a few times by the 11th Circuit. So, was it in the cards? I don't know. But at least in the legal world, everything broke his way all the way through.
All right. I want to get some more thoughts from you guys as we start to, I know you guys have to get going. You've got jobs and things to do. You've got other things to do than to hang with us. But I do want to get sort of your final thoughts on some of what he said today at his inaugural address. And I mean, there's so many quotes that stand out to me. He said, "My life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again." What was the line that stuck out to you today?
I would say that we're entering the golden age of the United States. And I think that will be the consistent message we hear through all 4 years of this next Trump presidency. I will say, after watching that speech and having watched the one in 2017, I think someone else noted it was a lot different than the American Carnage speech, right? And I believe that if you're looking at Donald Trump and how he's going to want to solidify a legacy, every Republican always points to is Ronald Reagan, right? Ronald Reagan was the last person to have his inauguration in the Capitol. He was the last, one of the last Republicans to win the popular vote by 60%, might I add, and he won 49 states. The one thing I would caution the Trump team on, not that they're taking my advice, but Ronald Reagan did that through optimism, right? And I think you saw a little bit more optimism in President Trump's speech today. If he continues that and makes it more about morning in America, I think that's where he'll have a lot of success. But overall thoughts about this inauguration, and I think we could say this regardless of who is getting sworn in, the system worked today. This is about celebrating our new president and vice president, but it's also about celebrating our democracy and the peaceful transfer of power.
Okay. Well
Final
said.
thoughts?
Yeah, I concur. This morning I started out with a similar tweet talking about, this is a republic at its finest. We're having another one, another, peaceful transition of power. Throughout the rest of the world, that doesn't occur like this. Even some of the ones that are, even some of our European friends, they have sketchy transfers of power. I would say the optimism that I take away, and again, also Trump is not going to take my advice, but if he did, I'd like him to hear that he needs to double down and make sure that he actually sticks to the statements that he's been making, that he is going to be the president for all of America, for all of our citizens, and stick with the notion that the policies that he's going to try to put into place is going to be for the benefit of everyone. It's going to be for the benefit of every single American, and I think if he does that and he's successful as that, I think it'll be great for the country, obviously, but it'll also perhaps bear more fruit for Republicans in some of these, bluer and purple states where people may take a look at it and say, hey, you know what, those policies weren't bad.
And one sentence to button it up. This is not about President Trump looking for a third term. We're not running for that. This is about legacy. So everything he does is going to be about the legacy as he is established. He mentioned that this morning as well. So he is very cognizant of that and taking into account your philosophies of what you said, Greg, as well. That is what will feed what Donald Trump does moving forward will be his legacy.